Hello, my name is James Parent. Alicia, or Allie Parent, is my biological sister, and I've known Joe for about 5 years now. Before giving my testimony, I would like to preface this by stating that I know that this will more than likely result in completely severing any and all ties that I have with Allie, albeit I would be lying if I were to claim that there was much of a relationship prior. I would also like to state that justice is impartial, as is truth, which alongside with memory are two sides of the same coin. I have a vivid recollection of events which should aptly convey the true character of my sister in an unbiased way. The story begins with my mother, who has expressed her permission to include these details. She has also stated that she would give her own testimony to verify these words if asked to do so. That way, part of my testimony cannot be disregarded as mere hearsay. I have chosen to bypass my childhood and adolescent memories, as those could be brushed off as nothing more than typical sibling feuds, but I digress. My sister graduated from high school in 2008. That autumn she attended an art school in New Hampshire. According to her, she felt homesick and drove back every weekend to visit her friends. Long story short, she dropped out before finishing her first semester. Come January, she began forging my mother's name on checks that she stole from her checkbook. She was able to steal a couple of $1,000s before my mother looked into what was happening to her money. My mother requested a bank statement, and all the transactions were listed. My mother then confronted Allie about this incident. She sobbed hysterically and became overtly apologetic, promising that it would never happen again. A few months later, in May, my mother caught her forging checks again. This time she made off with about $1,500. Once again, Allie apologized and promised that it would never happen again. My mother made herself clear when she said that if it were to happen again, Allie would have to move out because my mother simply could not feel safe living under her own roof with a thief. On the 4th of July, my mother went out shopping, and her debit card was declined at 2 different stores. She knew she had plenty of money in her account, so once again she went to the bank for a statement. It turns out that Allie had took the numbers from her card and went on a shopping spree. She spent about $700 before getting declined herself. At this point, my mother begrudgingly kicked my sister out of the house, albeit she wished to remain on good terms. They saw each other a couple of times after this incident, and my mother even invited Allie to go on vacation with her that October at her timeshare in the Poconos. During this vacation trip, Allie claimed that she was going back to school, but that was simply code for forging my mother's name to clear out her own Chet account. To limit possible ambiguities, Chet is the Connecticut Higher Education Trust. It's a savings account meant specifically for educational purposes. Both my sister and I had a decent amount saved in those accounts, enough for at least a full 4 years at UConn regional campuses, to put it into some sort of perspective. Also during this time frame, my mother had my uncle change all of the locks in the house, just so she could once again feel safe leaving our home unattended, because my sister never gave back her key upon getting kicked out. Come December, my mother chose to invite Allie over for Christmas dinner because I was having dinner with my girlfriend's family in Thomaston. My mother... Sorry. My mother thought the evening went well and everything was copacetic. That is, until the following day, when she went to look for one of her favorite necklaces. She found the pendant, but noticed that the gold chain which strung the pendant was missing. After searching through all of her jewelry, she realized that just about all of her gold rings and chains were gone. She estimated the loss at about $2,000. Once more, just for emphasis, and not for redundancy, I'll reiterate that this theft had to occur on Christmas, because the locks were changed shortly after she was kicked out of the house. In January, she forged my mom's name once again. This time, it was to take $8,000 from my Chet account, and she succeeded in doing so. In March, she forged my mother's name again to take another $8,000 from my Chet account. Thankfully, my mother was home when the check arrived, and was mystified when she saw it. She knew that she was the only one with clearance to withdraw the money, and had made no such request. This was the point where my mother finally had to go to the police. My sister was arrested and sentenced to pay restitution totaling the amount stolen. To this day, she has not done so. My mother was on the verge of tears when she told me this story. She said that she knows that she should have gone to the cops after the first incident, but after she stole from me, that was when she couldn't let it go. After my sister was arrested, my mother told me about how she stole that money from me. For better or worse, I am a highly forgiving person, and I still helped Allie when she needed $1,000 for her security deposit. This deposit was actually for an apartment shared between her, Joe, and another one of their friends. Joe and Allie promised to pay me back as soon as possible. Each of them would pay about $500 respectively, and although I worked with both of them, only Joe paid me back completely. Allie's bill for that was left at about $350. I kept my own records. After she was promoted and transferred at work, I gave her rides from Torrington to Forestville and back nearly every day. To be fair, she usually gave me gas money, albeit that didn't cover the excessive wear and tear placed on my vehicle. I'm mentioning this because I also became her ride to court for her hearing on the money she stole from me. In this instance, she blatantly lied to me and said that if she didn't come up with $2,000, she would be ripped away from her children and thrown in jail. Being the empathetic person that I am, I didn't want to see that happen, and once again I lent her the money, which simply went through the check system of the court, and the money was later mailed to my mom and given back to me. If I remember correctly, we only received 1 or 2 more checks after that, and that was the extent of the restitution paid. My mother told me that the probation office had called her before the hearing and asked what she wanted done to Allie, and my mother stressed that she didn't want her daughter in jail. Thus, Allie simply fed me a coercive, abject lie. Some time passed after this without a word from my sister. Eventually she got a car, and I lent her even more money so she could register the vehicle. This freed me from giving her daily rides to and from work. After that, I didn't hear much from her until she needed a place to live. She was evicted from her apartment for not paying rent and ended up going to my mother's house looking for help. My mother apprehensively let her in under the condition that if anything went missing, she would be out. My mother bought my sister a new car because the one she drove at the time was a death trap, and my mom was worried about the car breaking down on the side of the road with the kids in there. My sister was supposed to pay my mom back for the car, but she only gave about $20 a week and abruptly moved out before she paid back only about a third of what she owed. My mother has records of all the money that she received. Now that I have explained a few examples of how she has been manipulative, both towards my mother as well as me, I'm going to move on to how Allie treated her children while living in my mom's house. When I say she had a short fuse, I'm saying that replacement flint for Zippos are longer. Screaming was nearly a daily occurrence, as well as corporal punishment. My niece and nephew slept in the room just outside of my door, so I overheard many instances in which one of them, usually Eden, had trouble sleeping, and Allie would come storming out of her room and yell in his face that he needed to go to sleep. This clearly frightened him to the point of tears, and I always heard crying, usually followed by a smack. During this time frame, I was in the process of getting my bachelor's degree in psychology from UConn, and I recall studying quite extensively both developmental and child psychology. I read a few studies which indicated to me that when it comes to raising children and the reward versus discipline factor, that consistency trumps severity in terms of conveying to the child whether or not an action is acceptable or not. When I tried showing these studies to my sister and explaining this to her, she leered through me with an apathetic gaze and crossed her arms. I asked her if her children were old enough to understand logic and reasoning, and said, if so, that's great, use it. If not, then they have no idea why they're getting hit. When I finally finished explaining my research, she just shook her head and said, "Are you done?" in such a contemptuous tone that all I could say was yeah and walk away. Suffice it to say, her style of discipline remained the same after this conversation. Already, this is probably far longer than I had anticipated, so I'll only add one more incident that my mother divulged to me. After my sister moved out again, my mother invited her to go vacation to the Poconos. This was in October of 2015. Apparently, Eden was being fussy one night and didn't want to eat. Rather than simply let him go without eating until he was hungry and asked for food, my sister thought it wise to place her hands around his throat. She held them there until my mother yelled, "Alicia," and she slid her hands down to his shoulders. She was literally about to choke out her 2-year-old child in front of my mother. Although I could keep going, I'm going to end it here. Unfortunately, hindsight has shown me that the extent of my relationship with my sister began and ended with her needing something from me. And as aforementioned, I am well aware that this testimony will probably be the final nail in the coffin between us. That is, unless she apologizes, truly tries to make amends for her own... That is, unless she apologizes, truly tries to make amends with both me and my mother, and stops this nonsense of manipulating others for her own benefit. I saw what she did to Dallas, the father of Lyric, with Joe, and then how she repeated that same behavior to Joe with Zach. I'm afraid that this pattern will continue. I'm afraid that I'm afraid that I will never have a positive relationship with my sister. I'm afraid that she will adamantly deny my words and expel enough crocodile tears to convey to you that she's just a victim. Most of all, I am afraid for Lyric and Eden. I can only attest to the cries and screams I heard. I don't want to think what could have occurred behind closed doors. I hope that Allie receives the help that she needs and is able to grow. I wish her no ill will and can only hope for a positive outcome for all parties involved. As for Joe, I will keep this brief, all I can say is that I have only seen compassion and love for both his child and for Lyric. He loves them both and took excellent care of them when they were around. I don't think I ever saw either Lyric or Eden with a frown when Joe was around. I think that speaks volumes in and of itself. Although he may appear rough around the edges, Joe has a strong, caring heart, and I know he only wants what's best for his child. He is a great father and a great friend. Honestly, I haven't seen or heard from my sister in a couple of years now. Joe, on the other hand, we do keep in touch. I'm going to end this here, and I hope my words will illuminate and dispel any shadows of doubt as to the character of my sister. Lastly, Allie, I hope you receive the help you need. It would be nice to have a stable, mutual relationship where we can be civil siblings and I can see my niece and nephew. I miss them, and I miss you. I hope you don't harbor any resentment towards me because I chose to speak rather than remain quiet. Thank you.